What's going on, everybody? Today we're going to go ahead and do a Blue Jujutsu Kaisen deck profile. Blue Jujutsu Kaisen is going to be one of the stronger decks coming into the format here. And this is kind of a special take on it. This build in particular is not running the 4-cost Sukuna, instead opting for the 6-cost Sukuna. And we'll kind of go into more of the specifics here. But let's go ahead and start with our 0 costs. So we're going to be running 2 copies of Yuji. Essentially, he's the activate main, switch to resting, and then he generates an extra energy, so we just call those floaters. So pretty straightforward. There are only a couple of copies. We don't really need him that much, but it can be good if we're trying to get to the 6 energy mark. Next, of course, we do have 4 copies of the 0 cost Yuji. Pretty self-explanatory here. It's a raid target for all of our Sukunas, our raided Adoris, so very straightforward card. Definitely need 4 of that. And then probably our best 0 cost is going to be Nobara. We're going to have her at 4 copies. Essentially, she's the one that when you draw a card, you go ahead and sideline a card as well. So she helps cycle, and the best thing is she can cycle our fingers if we don't really have the active Yuji to kind of get our free value off of it. So she can cycle your fingers, and this deck is fairly balanced in terms of energy, but it does have more higher cost targets, so sometimes you can get a little bricky, and this card helps you cycle it out. Fantastic card there. So in total we're running 10 0 costs, as you can tell. And then next we only have one drop in the deck, and that's going to be Nobara. She's the one that when played you bounce a 1 cost or less, and then she sticks around. The main reason we're using her, of course, is going to be for the devil energy. Very important in this deck, is kind of sitting between the 4 to 6 energy marks, so she kind of helps us get there. A really good kind of early game combo is going to be Nobara into Nobara. That way you cycle, you get 2 energy, and then you can use her again to cycle if needed. So those are going to be our kind of early game targets. We are running 2 copies of Gojo. Essentially, this is just the guy where he's active, he generates more energy. Since we are opting for the 6 cost Sukuna over the 4 cost, we do want to make sure we have enough double energy generators to where we can have 6 energy and the shrine active all on the back line. He kind of helps you get there. It's not super crucial that we get him down, but it's kind of a nice early game target if we don't have other double energy generators like Nobara and a couple other ones coming up. And then probably one of the maybe key targets of the deck here is going to be the 2 cost Yuji. So in the traditional build, they restricted this card and the 4 cost Sukuna, so they cannot be ran together. But if we're not running the 4 cost Sukuna, we can of course run this card. So we have him at 4 copies, and essentially what he does is when played, he looks at the top 5 cards of your deck for Sukuna's finger, and then if you did add a card via this effect, you do have to bottom deck 1 card from your hand. So he's really our consistency factor that helps us find the fingers. Because oftentimes in the 4 cost Sukuna build, I found myself not really getting the fingers as often as I would like. And another thing is I was kind of lacking raid targets. And in this build, fingers are a lot more consistent, and we have a lot more raid targets for our Sukunas and our Yujis. So I'm not having to play them out as vanillas. Something I will say is with the 4 cost build, that one's going to have a better, I'd say, kind of high roll to it. If you're able to get all your pieces and you're able to get your fingers early, it will out-tempo this deck. But this deck is more like control focused. It has a bigger emphasis on bouncing things, and really it kind of helps you get there. It's more of a setup deck. You got to get your fingers, but we have multiple ways to kind of get those fingers, so it's more consistent than the 4 cost build. But if the 4 cost build does high roll, it is going to be stronger than this build, but this build is definitely not to be slept on, I'd say. Moving into that, we're going to have our 3 costs. We have really just kind of a double energy Yuji and a raid target if needed. His effect is during the opponent's turn, if you have a Sukuna's finger in your sideline, he gains 1000 BP, so he can essentially become a 4k blocker if needed. Really, we just like him for the devil energy, good to sit on the back line, and of course extra raid targets. Typically we're not really playing him on the front line for his effect, but it can come up, so it's always good to be versatile there. Moving to that, we are going to have 3 of our color trigger Yujis. So we're only running 3 color triggers in the deck. The blue color trigger is pretty decent, I'd say. I mean, it bounces at 35, but you know, once you kind of get to the late game, most targets are going to be above 35. So I mean, at that point, he's really not really doing much other than maybe bouncing like a chump blocker, if that. And his effect is when played, choose up to 1 character with 3,500 or less BP on your opponent's frontline. If you have 1 to 2 Sukuna's fingers in your sideline, return the chosen character to their hand. And then if you have 3 or more, you sideline it. He can come up. He is costly though, because he does cost 2 action points. Once again, we're kind of just running him for our double energy and another raid target. So in total, this deck has 4, 8, 11, and 14 targets for raids, which is really the main kind of attracting factor. Is I'm not having to play out vanillas with this deck. I'm able to actually raid the targets and get their effects, so that's awesome. But yeah, he's a decent card. He does come up once in a while, you know, just kind of clearing, you know, like I said, chump blockers. If you're needing to push for lethal, you can do this Yuji, bounce something that's low, and then play the raid Yuji, and then you just bounce 2 targets, and you got an attacker. So this card's very versatile, but once again, kind of expensive, so that's why we're running it at only 3 of. And probably the best card in the deck right now is the 4-cost raid Yuji. Probably needs no explanation here, but when played, you choose 1 character on your opponent's frontline with 4,000 or less BP, and you essentially return it to its hand. So he's 4,000 that bounces, and he bounces pretty much all the raid targets in the game. He hits most things except for, of course, 5Ks. But, you know, being able to bounce a raid, and you send the raid back to their hand, but their raid target, like their little guys, end up getting sidelined instead of returning to their hand. So it's kind of disgusting. This card is insane. Definitely a reason he has like a $25 price tag. Really, really good card. Probably the best card in the deck. And just generates so much tempo for you. You know, if you kind of want to hold your Yujis. I mean, if they're just playing like, you know, low bodies early, like 3,000s, 2,500s, we're obviously not going to use our Yuji on that. We'd rather use it for the raid targets. And, you know, understanding the deck you're versing, like if you're versing green Kurapika, you're going to want to bounce their 4,000 Kurapikas and their 4,000 Hisokas. Because obviously their raid is going to be 5,000, so he's not going to be able to hit that. So just, you know, making sure we can kind of clear their front line before that raid, you know, Kurapika comes down. But yeah, fantastic card. And then the next card, probably my favorite card, is the 5-cost Sukuna. So we're running this guy at 4 copies. He's essentially kind of what Yuji does, this 2-cost Yuji here. When played, he essentially just chooses 1 character on your opponent's front line and he switches it to resting, and it remains set to resting the next time it'd be switched to active. So not only does he freeze a body, he also looks at the top 5 cards of your deck for either a Sukuna's Finger or a Malevolent Shrine. So he just adds more consistency to the deck. Because with the original 4-cost Sukuna ability, you're really just running this guy to search for your fingers. And even then, you're not really running them at 4 copies, it's probably like 3 or 2 copies. Just because you need to clear up space for your raid targets, and there's not as many Yujis in the deck. But with this build, since we have more Yujis, we can obviously include this guy at 4 of. He's really, really good. Like I said, taps the body and then searches for your fingers, and you know, getting the fingers in trash is the main thing of the deck, and having a total of 8 searchers that can find those fingers is really what gives the deck its consistency. And then of course we have the star of the show, the 6-cost Sukuna. So this guy, essentially, I'll give you the rundown here. He has Impact 1, he's a 6-cost 2 action point. When played, if on the front line, your opponent returns 1 character on their front line to their hand. If you have 2 to 3 copies of Sukuna's Finger in your sideline, they instead return 2 copies. And if you have all 4 in their sideline, they return 3 copies. So the main thing to note is your opponent does choose the cards they return. However, with this deck, you're always going to be sitting at like 2 to 3 copies of your Finger in trash just due to the consistency of it. So once you have the opportunity to play him down, your opponent just loses, you know, half of their front line. If you can somehow get all 4 in there, you know, if they're not stuck in your life or something, then you return 3. But I mean, he's very versatile in terms of clearing your board. your opponent's board, because you can definitely set up a raid Yuji. So because you'll have 3 action points, you could do your raid Yuji, bounce something, and then at that point you play your 6-cost Sukuna, play it on the front line, and then they have to return 2 more things. So you just cleared 75% of their front line. I think this card is kind of slept on, and obviously people are going to prefer the 4-cost Sukuna because not only is he a raid target, he does get the plus 1000 and impact depending on the fingers and trash. But this guy is also very good. I mean, he has built-in impact, and then like I said, this deck's more focused on control and bouncing things back to your opponent's hand. And this guy enables us to do so. We don't want to run him at 4 copies, we want him just at 3, because he is expensive, and you're probably only going to play 1 of these a game. If you're able to slam 2 down, you probably just win the game at that point. But yeah, very good card, not to be slept on, and we'll kind of go into the events here. So of course, no explanation here. We're going to have 4 Sukuna's Finger, the main card of the deck, the whole engine it's built around. For those of you that don't know, you essentially either have to rest an active Yuji, or you have to sideline one of your life cards to play this card. And what it does is it draws you cards and refreshes an action point. So it's essentially just a free draw if you have this set up. And something to keep in mind, if you have your Yujis on the back line, like a 0-cost Yuji or any one of these, and you had played it the turn prior, and going into your next turn you use Finger, you can draw a card, and then of course you can raid on top of that Yuji, so the fact you switched it to resting doesn't even matter. And then of course, the Finger plays into the 6-cost Sukuna here, plays into the Yuji here. And with these searchers, it helps you get the fingers into the sideline where we want them. But like I mentioned earlier, the 4-cost build, if it can high roll, I mean, it's not going to have its fingers nearly as consistently as this deck, but there's always a potential to high roll it and just open up with a couple of fingers and cycle. If that deck does high roll, it will have like a higher ceiling, I'd say, in terms of its power. Just because that 4-cost Sukuna, if you have the Shrine and you have your fingers set up, that 4-cost Sukuna is nearly unstoppable. But this build, you get to do more of the deck consistently, which is what I like, and it's more control focused. So moving from there, we're going to have our domain expansion. We're only going to be running this at 3 copies. The deck space is really tight, and I thought about cutting a Nobara, but we really don't want to be breaking early on. We need to make sure we can get enough energy to play our bigger stuff. So 3 domain expansion. Since we are running a 2 action point boss monster right here, domain expansion is going to be extremely useful. So that way we can essentially play with 4 action points if we do end up playing this guy. And allows us to be more versatile in terms of bouncing their board. Because if you're not able to have a raid Yuji set up, you could do, play a Yuji, domain expansion, now you're back to 3, play your raid Yuji on the target you just played, and then play Sukuna, and bam, you just bounce 3 out of the 4 of their board. So, only 3. I wish I could get it to 4, but I just can't find the space to cut another card. All these cards are too valuable, so moving from there, we're going to go ahead and have Divergent Fist. Really, no explanation here. It's a special trigger, and Blue JJK does have really good special triggers. This one's very straightforward, so normally it can just bounce to 5000 BP or less, but if you have Yuji on the board, it sidelines it, so it hits everything in the game currently. Hits your Raid Kurapikas and your Yamamotos. So with this card, thankfully it's very good in terms of being a kill target. Some other kill targets like Idol Transfiguration in purple, and then the 10 Shadows in yellow JJK, those ones really aren't the greatest. So the fact we just hit 5s naturally, even without a Yuji, is insane. And then if we have a Yuji, we just kill it. So yeah, definitely 4 copies there. And then last but not least, we of course have Shrine. We want this at 2 copies. We do want to see it, and this Sukuna right here helps us see this Shrine more consistently. And for those of you that aren't aware, it's 4 energy, 1 action point. You play it active, so you kind of bypass, having to wait a turn to use it. Then you essentially switch it to resting, and then you give one of your Sukuna characters the following effects, dependent on how many fingers are in your Shrine. or in your sideline. So if you have 2 or more fingers, it gets damage 2. 3 or more, it gets snipe. And then 4 or more gets impact +1. So ideally, we're going to have this shrine down, and then we're going to have our double energy generators like Nobara, Gojo, Yuji, so that way we can have the shrine and play the 6-cost Sukuna. And since this guy's a raid target, if we have the shrine down already, and he's able to find us more fingers, we add the consistency level there, and we have him active. So the turn we play shrine and him, we can use the effect right away. And like I said, depending on how many fingers, we'll get some different effects there. But this is the whole deck breakdown. Honestly, it's a pretty balanced deck in terms of its energy flow and having good, viable targets to raid. And honestly, this Yuji is, it's really good. I can see why they restricted it with the 4-cost. And, something to keep in mind, you're probably going to be whiffing a lot of the times on these Yujis and the Sukunas, and that's fine, because it just means we're getting closer and closer to drawing the finger. And then if we are hitting off these 2, that's even better. We're getting more tempo and, kind of more pressure in our favor. But this is the whole deck breakdown. I'm trying to think if I have any final, kind of tech tricks or remarks. Nothing I can really think of. The deck's pretty straightforward. It just has an engine and wants to play around, making sure you get your fingers and making sure you can play this guy efficiently based on the fingers, and then, of course, shrine. And that's kind of the whole deck breakdown here, so I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any questions or comments, make sure to leave them down below. I think next I'll probably try and look at doing a purple JJK deck build, just because that deck's a lot more brain intensive than I thought it would be. Playing it for a couple of times, but that 4-cost ghetto can definitely be a little disgusting if played right. So kind of keep your eyes out there, and catch you guys in the next one. Thank you.